The mountains of Colorado, 1858. A land haunted by ambition and wilderness. The Pikes Peak gold rush had drawn thousands, each dreaming of fortune, most finding only hardship. For Sarah Mitchell, 8 months pregnant and abandoned in a mountain. A pass as winter approached, the American dream had become a nightmare. Left behind by her husband's greedy party to die alone in the wilderness, she faced certain death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But fate has unexpected mercies. Even in the harshest places, this is the remarkable true story of a woman's extraordinary survival and the silent Apache tracker who risked everything to save a stranger and her unborn child, creating a sanctuary where others had chosen cruelty. The September sun cast long shadows through the pine trees, painting the mountainside in amber and gold. The wagon train moved slowly, wheels groaning against the steep path that wound through the Rockies. 15 wagons had started the journey from Springfield, Illinois. Now only 8 remained, the others turned back or broken beyond repair on the merciless trail. Sarah Mitchell sat at the back of the last wagon, one hand pressed against the swell of her belly, the other clutching the rough wooden planks beneath her. Each jolt sent pain through her exhausted body. 8 months pregnant, her face was pale beneath her sunbonnet, her blue eyes shadowed with fatigue. At 23, she had the weathered look of someone much older. The harsh trail aged everyone, but especially a woman carrying life within. The wagon belonged to her husband's business partners, the Caldwell brothers. Thomas, the elder, drove with stiff-backed determination, his brother Robert beside him, a rifle across his knees. Neither had spoken directly to Sarah since sunrise. Her husband, William, rode ahead with the scouting party. A bookkeeper by trade, he'd been transformed by gold fever into someone she barely recognized. A man who spoke endlessly of claims and riches, who studied maps late into the night by lantern light, who sold their modest home and shop for a chance at fortune. "It's getting steeper," Robert Caldwell called back without turning. "We're going to have to lighten the load again." Sarah tensed. They'd been lightening the load for weeks. First the furniture, then personal belongings, books, mementos, items deemed non-essential to the pursuit of gold. She instinctively reached for the small leather-bound journal tucked in her pocket, her sole remaining possession besides the clothes she wore. Thomas pulled the wagon to a halt, the oxen heaving with exhaustion. "William needs to deal with this," he muttered, gazing up at the trail ahead, where the scouting party had disappeared around a bend. The other wagons continued forward, the gap between them widening. No one looked back at the stopped wagon. Such was the gold rush. Alliances frayed quickly when fortune seemed close. "He won't be back until evening," Robert said. "And we're losing daylight. That storm's still coming." He gestured toward the western horizon, where dark clouds gathered, heavy with the threat of early snow. Sarah felt the child within her shift and kick, as if sensing her growing unease. The Caldwell brothers had never approved of William bringing his pregnant wife on the expedition. They'd made that clear from the beginning, their disapproval growing with each mile. "We can't wait," Thomas decided, climbing down from the driver's seat. "We need to make the next pass before that storm hits." Robert nodded, already moving to the back of the wagon where Sarah sat. "Ma'am, we need to unload more weight." Sarah looked at the sparse contents remaining. A few sacks of flour and beans, some tools, bedrolls. There was nothing left to earn. Discard except people. The realization dawned on her with terrible clarity. "You mean me," she said softly. The brothers exchanged glances, neither denying it. "William wouldn't allow this," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Thomas's expression hardened. "William isn't here, and he'll understand once we explain. We can't risk everyone for one woman." "I'm his wife," Sarah protested. "I'm carrying his child." "Which makes you a burden," Robert replied coldly. "This trail's killing the oxen. We're all at risk if we don't make that pass." The cruelty of it struck her like a physical blow. These men had eaten at her table back in Springfield, had called William brother, had smiled at the news of her pregnancy. "You, can't leave me here," she whispered, looking around at the wilderness. The nearest settlement was days behind them, the next one an uncertain distance ahead. "We're not heartless," Thomas said, reaching into the wagon to extract a bundle. "We've made provisions." The provisions turned out to be meager: a small canvas tent, a blanket, some jerky and hardtack, a tin cup, a knife. Enough to mock the appearance of charity while ensuring her death would be slow rather than immediate. "William will come. Back for you," Robert added, not meeting her eyes. "When we reach the camp, we'll send him with supplies." The lie hung in the air between them. The scouting party was already miles ahead. By the time William realized what had happened, returning would mean abandoning the gold claim they'd sacrificed everything to reach, and winter in the mountains wouldn't wait. "Please," Sarah said, one hand on her belly, "the baby could come any day." For a moment she thought she saw hesitation in Thomas's eyes. Then he looked away, toward the distant wagons disappearing around the bend. "The others are getting too far ahead," he said. "We need to move now." What followed seemed to happen in a dream. Sarah found herself standing on the trail, the small pile of provisions at her feet, as the wagon lurched forward. She didn't scream or beg. Some small part of her that remained intact, despite everything, refused to give them the satisfaction. Instead, she watched in silence as the wagon rounded the bend, dust settling in its wake. Then she was truly alone, the vast wilderness spreading in all directions, the gathering storm clouds darkening the western sky. Sarah stood motionless for several minutes, shock holding her in place. The child within her kicked again, harder, this time as if demanding action. The pain brought her back to herself, to the reality of her situation. She surveyed her surroundings with new clarity. The trail ran along a steep mountainside, trees crowding close, except where the path had been cleared. Below, the land fell away into a valley dense with pine forest. Above, rocky slopes climbed toward distant peaks. The September air was already sharp with the promise of winter. Surviving alone would have been nearly impossible for anyone. For a woman in her condition, it seemed entirely so. But Sarah Mitchell had not survived 8 months on the trail by being easily defeated. The journey had stripped away any delicacy that life in Springfield might have nurtured. She had buried friends along the way, had gone hungry more days than not, had learned to identify edible plants and set snares for small game. She gathered the supplies, pitching the small tent in a sheltered spot a little way from the trail. When William returned, he would need to see her. The work was exhausting, each movement an effort against her unwieldy body and growing fatigue. By the time the tent was secured, the first fat raindrops were already falling. Sarah crawled inside just as the storm broke in earnest. Rain hammered against the canvas, the threadbare tent already beginning to leak in several places. She placed the tin cup to catch one drip, using the blanket to shield herself from others. The temperature dropped rapidly as darkness fell. In the close confines of the damp tent, Sarah finally allowed herself to weep, not from fear or self-pity, but from a deep, burning anger. Anger at the Caldwell brothers for their betrayal. Anger at the other travelers who had looked away. Most of all, anger at William, who had dragged her into this wilderness chasing dreams of gold, who had ridden ahead, leaving her vulnerable. When the tears subsided, she took out her journal and wrote by the dim light filtering through the canvas. The simple act of recording what had happened helped restore her calm, her sense of self. When she finished writing, she made her first plan. At dawn, she would follow the trail forward. Moving was better than waiting for a rescue that might never come. The storm continued through the night, the temperature falling further. Sarah drifted in and out of troubled sleep, her body curled protectively around her unborn child. Dreams came, memories of the home she'd left behind, nightmares of endless trails leading nowhere. Several times she woke with a gasp, certain she'd heard footsteps outside the tent, only to recognize the sound of rain dripping from pine branches. Dawn brought a brief respite from the storm. Sarah emerged from the tent to find the world transformed. A thin layer of wet snow covered the ground, already melting where weak sunlight touched it. The air had the brittle quality that presaged true winter. She ate a small piece of jerky, rationing carefully, then dismantled the tent with numb fingers. Each movement was a struggle now, her pregnant body protesting, unusual pains coming and going in her lower back. Not labor yet, she thought, but a warning that her time was growing short. Sarah fashioned the tent canvas into a crude pack to carry her meager supplies, then began walking. The trail was treacherous, muddy from the rain, slick with melting snow. She moved slowly, one careful step at a time, using a fallen branch as a walking stick. By midday, the storm clouds returned, darker than before. The snow began again, not melting now, but accumulating. Sarah's progress slowed further, each step requiring full concentration. Her thin shoes were soaked through, feet numb with cold. Twice she slipped, catching herself just in time. The third. A time, her foot landed on a snow-covered rock that shifted under her weight. Sarah fell heavily, sliding several feet down the slope before managing to halt her descent by grabbing at a small tree. Pain shot through her ankle, but worse was the cramping that seized her abdomen, stronger than before, rhythmic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Not now," she gasped, struggling to her knees. "Please, not now." But her body had its own timing, indifferent to circumstances. The fall had triggered what had been threatening for days. Her child was coming. Here on the mountainside in the gathering snowstorm, Sarah dragged herself to a somewhat sheltered spot beneath a large pine, its branches creating a partial canopy against the falling snow. With shaking hands, she managed to unfold the tent canvas, creating a small windbreak. The pain was coming in waves now, unmistakable. As the afternoon light faded, Sarah's world narrowed to a pinpoint of suffering and determination. The cold, her hunger, her abandonment, all receded against the overwhelming reality of childbirth. She bit down on a fold of her dress to keep from screaming as contractions tore through her. In moments of clarity between pains, she became aware of how desperate her situation truly was. Night was falling, the temperature was dropping rapidly. The storm showed no signs of abating. Even if she managed to deliver the baby safely, how would either of them survive the night? It was in one such moment of awful clarity that Sarah became aware she was being watched. At first, she thought it was a hallucination born of pain and fear, a dark figure standing motionless among the trees, partially obscured by falling snow. She blinked, expecting it to vanish. Instead, it moved closer, revealing itself as a man. He was tall, dressed in a mixture of native clothing and what appeared to be repurposed American garments, buckskin leggings, a dark wool coat too large. In for his frame moccasins. His black hair was long, pulled back with a leather cord. His face was weathered, high-cheeked, eyes like dark flint, observing her with neither threat nor compassion, merely assessment. Sarah had heard stories of the Apache who still moved through these mountains, avoiding the gold seekers when possible, defending their territory when necessary. She had never seen one until now. Fear gave her new strength. She struggled to sit upright, one hand groping for the knife in her pack. The man made no move toward her, continuing his silent observation from several yards away. Another contraction seized her, stronger than any before. Sarah couldn't suppress a cry of pain. When the wave passed and she could focus again, the man had moved closer, just beyond arm's reach. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture had changed slightly. "Please," Sarah said, unsure if he understood English, unsure what she was even asking for. "My baby is coming." The man tilted his head slightly, eyes moving to her swollen belly, then back to her face. He spoke a single word in what she assumed was Apache. When she didn't respond, he tried again in heavily accented English. "You, alone." Sarah nodded, tears mixing with snowflakes on her cheeks. "They left me. The wagons. My husband." She couldn't finish. The man's expression darkened momentarily, something like disgust flickering across his features. He looked up at the sky, then back at the trail, assessing. "Storm bad," he said. "Night is coming. Baby coming. You die here." The blunt assessment should have terrified her, but Sarah found his honesty oddly reassuring after weeks of Williams. False promises. Yes, she agreed simply. He considered this for a long moment. Then, with a decisiveness that allowed no argument, he began gathering her meager supplies, wrapping them efficiently in the tent canvas. When he had finished, he stepped closer and crouched beside her. "I help," he said. "Not safe here. Have a place." Sarah hesitated only briefly. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Certain death on the mountainside versus a chance, however uncertain, with this stranger. "What's your name?" she asked, needing to know who this man was before placing her life in his hands. He seemed surprised by the question, as if his identity was irrelevant to the situation. After a pause, he answered, "Nakohe." "I'm Sarah," she replied, just as another. Contraction gripped her. She cried out, curling forward. Nakohe waited until the pain subsided, then moved with surprising gentleness, helping her to her feet. When it became clear she couldn't walk, he lifted her easily, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. He had already secured her bundled possessions across his back. "Hold," he instructed, and Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him as he began to move through the snow. Nakohe didn't follow the trail. Instead, he moved directly into the forest, navigating the steep terrain with the surety of someone who knew every tree, every rock. He walked for what seemed hours, his breathing steady despite his burden. The storm intensified, but beneath the denser forest canopy, the snowfall was lighter. Sarah drifted in and out of awareness, the contractions coming faster now. She pressed her face against Nakohe's shoulder to muffle her cries, unwilling to show weakness to this stoic stranger who had appeared like something from a fever dream. Just when she thought she could endure no more, the forest opened into a small, hidden valley. Nestled against a cliff face, partially concealed by overhanging rock, stood a structure. Not a teepee, as she might have expected, but a solid cabin built of logs and stone. "You're home," Sarah managed between pains. Nakohe shook his head. "Old trapper cabin. I find it empty. Make it better." He carried her inside, where a banked fire still glowed in a stone hearth. The interior was sparse, but unexpectedly comfortable. A raised sleeping platform covered with furs, shelves holding supplies, dried herbs hanging from rafters, various tools arranged with precise care. Nakohe laid Sarah gently on the furs, then moved with practiced efficiency, building up the fire, heating water, arranging clean hides. His preparations made clear that this wasn't the first birth he had attended, a realization that both surprised Sarah and gave her comfort. When he approached her again, his manner had changed subtly. He knelt beside her, hands steady, as he examined her condition with clinical detachment. He spoke more words at once than he had used before. "Baby comes soon. You are strong. You are not fear." It wasn't a question or reassurance, but a command. Sarah found herself nodding, drawing on some deep reserve of courage she hadn't known she possessed. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. Nakohe remained beside her, his presence steady, his instructions clear and simple. He supported her back when needed, pressed herbal compresses to her forehead, offered water between contractions. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling against the cabin walls. Inside, a different kind of storm was breaking. When Sarah felt she could push no longer, when her strength seemed utterly spent, Nakohe's voice reached her through the haze of exhaustion. Baby waits for mother's courage. You find, you bring to light. Something in those words, their strange poetry, their absolute certainty, gave Sarah a final surge of determination. With a cry that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself, she gave one last tremendous push, and then, cutting through the storm's fury and her own fading cry, came a new sound, thin, outraged, miraculous. The first breath, the first declaration of a new life. Nakohe moved swiftly, handling the infant with surprising tenderness. He cleaned the tiny girl with warm water, wrapped her in soft rabbit furs, then placed her in Sarah's trembling arms. "Daughter," he said simply, strong like a mother. Sarah gazed down at the perfect red face, the wisps of dark hair, the tiny fists already clenched as if ready to fight. Despite everything, the abandonment, the wilderness, the storm, this child had found her way into the world. "Elizabeth," Sarah whispered, naming her daughter for the grandmother she would likely never meet. As Sarah held her newborn close, the storm outside began to ease, as if nature itself acknowledged this small miracle in the heart of the wilderness. Inside the cabin, Nakohe moved quietly, tending the fire, preparing a herbal tea that he eventually brought to her in a carved wooden cup. "Drink," he instructed. "Give strength. Help milk come." Sarah sipped the bitter liquid, too exhausted to question. Her eyes were growing heavy, the ordeal of the day catching up with her. As she drifted towards sleep, her daughter secure against her chest, she found clarity enough for one question. "Why did you help me?" Nakohe paused in his work, considering her with those dark, unreadable eyes. When he finally answered, his words were careful, each one chosen deliberately. "Your people leave you, cast away like a broken thing. This dishonors all who walk as men." He looked away toward the fire. "I have a sister once. Men of your people find her alone. She does not survive what they do." The simple statement contained volumes of grief and anger, making Sarah's own abandonment seem almost trivial by comparison. Yet instead of continuing that cycle of cruelty, Nakohe had chosen compassion. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words painfully inadequate. He made a small gesture of dismissal. "Long ago. Different path now." His gaze returned to her and the baby. "Sleep. Safe here." As Sarah surrendered to exhaustion, her last waking thought was of the strange turns of fate. Abandoned by those who should have protected her, she had found sanctuary with one who had every reason to hate her kind. In the heart of the wilderness, humanity had reasserted itself in the most unexpected form. Outside, the storm passed, stars emerging in the clearing sky. Inside the cabin, a small family born of crisis and compassion slept beneath warm furs, while Nakohe kept watch through the night, guardian of a trust he had never sought, but would not abandon. Sarah woke to unfamiliar sounds, a knife against wood, water bubbling, the soft crackle of a well-maintained fire. For a moment confusion clouded her mind. This wasn't the wagon, wasn't the trail. The events of the previous day rushed back in a flood. The abandonment, the storm, Nakohe, the birth. She bolted upright, instantly searching for her child. Elizabeth lay beside her in a small nest of furs, sleeping peacefully, her tiny face relaxed. Relief washed over Sarah, followed immediately by the awareness of her body's condition, sore, depleted, but remarkably functional, given what she'd endured. Across the cabin, Nakohe sat by the fire, carving something from a piece of pine. He glanced up, noting her consciousness with a slight nod, then returned to his work. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable but expectant, as if waiting for her to find her bearings in this new reality. Sarah carefully shifted to a sitting position, adjusting the furs around herself and the baby. Sunlight filtered through the cabin's single window, revealing details she'd been too exhausted to notice the night before. The cabin was larger than it had first appeared, roughly 20 feet square. The log walls were chinked with a mixture of clay and moss, keeping out the wind. The floor was packed earth-covered partially with woven reed mats. Everything was arranged with meticulous care, tools hanging from pegs, supplies stored on sturdy shelves, nothing wasted or out of place. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. "Sunrise, set, rise again," Nakohe answered, without looking up from his carving. "Baby wake twice, eat well." Sarah was startled. "I slept through my daughter's crying." Now he did look up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I wake you, you feed, you not remember." She had no memory of this, which both alarmed and impressed her. She must have been functioning in some half-conscious state, responding to her child's needs even in profound exhaustion. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling wholly inadequate for what this stranger had done for them. Nakohe acknowledged her gratitude with a slight inclination of his head, then rose fluidly and brought her a wooden bowl containing some kind of stew, rich with the scent of herbs and game meat. "Eat," he said. "Make milk strong." As Sarah ate, she watched Nakohe return to his carving. His hands were fascinating, powerful yet precise, moving with the confidence of someone who had survived by his own skill for many years. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but Sarah felt a growing need to understand her situation more clearly. "Will you take us to the nearest settlement when I'm stronger?" she asked finally. Nakohe's hands stilled. He looked up with an expression that wasn't quite pity, but something adjacent to it. "No settlement close," he said. 5 days' walk, good weather. Pass closed now. Snow come early this year." "But surely someone will come searching," Sarah said, unable to keep the desperation from her voice. "My husband!" She stopped, the reality of her abandonment striking anew. William had ridden ahead with the scouting party. Had he even returned to the wagon train to discover her absence? Would he have risked the group's gold ambitions to search for her? The cold calculation in Thomas Caldwell's eyes when he'd left had told her the answer. "Gold seekers do not return," Nakohe said, confirming her fears. "Trail buried soon. No one come until spring thaw." The finality of his assessment hit Sarah like a physical blow. Spring thaw was months away. The mountain pass would be impassable until then. She and Elizabeth were truly cut off from the world she had known. "We'll die here," she whispered. Nakohe shook his head. "Not die if you learn a new way." He gestured. "Around the cabin. Shelter good, food if you hunt smart, wood for fire, water is clean, need more, but I have enough." "You mean?" Sarah struggled to articulate the startling understanding. "You'll let us stay? Through winter?" He shrugged as if the question was irrelevant. "Baby not survive the journey. You cannot survive alone. Answer simple." The matter-of-fact way he assessed their situation was oddly comforting. There was no false hope in Nakohe, but neither was there despair, only a clear-eyed evaluation of challenges and resources. "Why would you do this for us?" Sarah pressed, still struggling to understand his motivations. Nakohe was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words were measured as if drawn up from a deep well of private thought. "Apache way teach. World has enough cruelty without adding more." He looked directly at her, his dark eyes intense. "I not let a woman and child die when my hands can prevent." Something in his gaze told Sarah there was more to his story, but she sensed pressing further would only result in silence. Instead, she nodded, accepting his answer and the implicit arrangement it contained. They would winter here under his protection and guidance. "I won't be a burden," she said firmly. "When I'm stronger, I'll work. I can cook, sew, preserve food. I'm a quick learner." A ghost of a smile touched Nakohe's lips. "Already see you. Strong, not worry about the burden." The conversation was interrupted by Elizabeth's waking cry. Sarah gathered her daughter close, marveling again at the tiny perfection of her, the shell-like ears, the miniature fingernails, the fierce, determined wail. As she fed her child, Nakohe discreetly busied himself at the far side of the cabin, allowing her privacy. The day passed in a gentle rhythm, unlike anything Sarah had experienced on the trail. Nakohe left briefly to check his traps, returning with 2 rabbits. He showed her how he prepared them, wasting nothing, the meat for food, the bones for tools, the fur for warmth. He worked methodically, occasionally explaining a technique or identifying a useful part in his sparse English. Sarah observed carefully, mentally cataloguing everything. If they were to survive until spring, she would need to become an active participant in their subsistence, not merely a recipient of Nakohe's charity. It was difficult to accept that this was her life now, so far removed from what she had planned when leaving Springfield. Yet there was an unexpected simplicity to it that calmed her troubled spirit. That evening, as Nakohe prepared a tea from pine needles, "Good for healing," he explained. "Much medicine in the forest." Sarah found herself watching him with growing curiosity. He was a contradiction, a man of few words yet eloquent gestures, physically intimidating yet gentle with her child, a member of a tribe her husband's group had feared yet her only protector in this wilderness. "Where did you learn English?" she asked, breaking another comfortable silence. Nakohe added more water to the pine needle infusion before answering. "Army fought 2 winters, taught scout trails." "You worked for the army?" Sarah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. His expression darkened slightly. "Young, then. Think white man's world have place for an Apache who help." The bitterness in his tone spoke volumes about how that belief had been rewarded. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Gold found, treaties broken, land taken." He handed her the tea, his face once again composed. "Old story, told many times." Sarah accepted both the tea and the clear indication that the subject was closed. She sipped the astringent liquid, surprised by its pleasant resinous flavor. As she did, she noticed something outside the window, fat snowflakes drifting down, illuminated by the last rays of setting sun. "Snow again," she observed. Nakohe nodded. "First big storm coming, many days." "Good, we have meat cured, wood stacked." The calm preparation evident in everything around her, from the well-stocked shelves to the neat pile of firewood, stood in stark contrast to the frantic, often disorganized push she had experienced with the wagon train. The gold seekers had been constantly rushing, constantly anxious, constantly counting supplies that dwindled too quickly. Here, there was purpose without panic. "You've planned for this," she realized aloud. "Winter comes every year," he replied simply, not a surprise for those who watch. That night, as the wind picked up outside, howling around the cabin's sturdy walls, Sarah lay awake beside her sleeping daughter. The events of the past days swirled in her mind, the betrayal by people she had trusted, the birth in desperate circumstances, the unexpected sanctuary with a man who by all accounts should have been a stranger at best, an enemy at worst. She thought of William, wondering if he had looked for her at all, or if gold fever had consumed whatever love he once held for her. She thought of the Caldwell brothers, calculating the value of human life against the promise of wealth. She thought of the hopes she'd carried across the plains and mountains, now transformed into something entirely different, not dreams of prosperity, but simple survival. The grief came then, washing over her in silent waves, grief for the future she had imagined, for the life Elizabeth might have had in civilization, for the naive woman she had been just weeks ago. She wept quietly, tears soaking into the fur beneath her cheek. From across the cabin, Nakohe's voice came softly through the darkness. "Cry good, release the spirit's pain. Tomorrow, cry done, work begin." His unexpected acknowledgement of her grief, neither dismissive nor indulgent, somehow made it easier to bear. Sarah wiped her eyes, composing herself. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for everything." His only response was a soft sound that might have been acknowledgement, might have been simply the settling of the fire. Either way, Sarah felt her tension ease, sleep finally claiming her as the storm gathered strength outside. The blizzard lasted 5 days, snow piled against the cabin walls, reaching halfway up the single window. Inside, life took on a new rhythm, dictated by necessity rather than the clock or calendar. Sarah's strength returned gradually, her body healing from the birth, with Nakohe's herbal remedies aiding the process. True to his word, he began teaching her as soon as she was able. How to maintain the fire at optimal heat. How to prepare the various dried foods stored for winter. How to care for her child in these primitive conditions. Sarah proved an apt pupil, her natural intelligence combining with the practical skills she had developed on the frontier. The isolation should have been terrifying, but instead Sarah found it strangely freeing. The confined space of the cabin became not a prison but a world unto itself, one with clear purposes and immediate rewards for effort. Feed the fire, the cabin stays warm. Prepare food properly, hunger is satisfied. Care for Elizabeth diligently. She thrives despite the circumstances. Nakohe remained something of an enigma, revealing himself in small moments rather than conversation. He crafted a cradle board for Elizabeth, decorating it with intricate symbols he didn't explain. He showed unexpected patience when teaching Sarah, never expressing frustration when she failed to grasp a concept immediately. At night, he often sang softly in Apache, the melodic sounds seeming to soothe Elizabeth when she was fretful. On the 6th day, the storm finally broke, leaving a transformed landscape outside. The valley was blanketed in snow several feet deep, the trees festooned with white, the sky a piercing blue that hurt the eyes. Nakohe ventured out to check his traps and survey the condition of the pass. He returned at dusk, his expression confirming what Sarah already suspected. "Pass completely closed," he reported. "No way through until spring is warm." Though she had expected this news, hearing it confirmed still sent a shiver of apprehension through her. They were truly cut off now, dependent entirely on their own resources until the thaw. "Do we have enough supplies?" she asked. Nakohe nodded. "If careful. Need fresh meat when possible. Dried food alone make body weak." He stamped snow from his moccasins. "Tomorrow show you snowshoes. Important skill." The prospect of venturing outside the cabin's safety made Sarah both nervous and eager. As much as the small space had become a haven, she felt the need for fresh air, for a horizon wider than log walls. The following day brought her first lesson in moving through deep snow. Nakohe had fashioned snowshoes from bent wood and rawhide. Larger ones for himself, smaller ones better suited to Sarah's frame. Elizabeth, wrapped snugly in the cradle board, was secured to Sarah's back with a series of leather straps that distributed the weight evenly. Sarah's first attempts were awkward, resulting in several falls into soft snowdrifts. Nakohe never laughed at her struggles, but occasionally she caught a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. By the end of the morning, she had mastered the basic walking technique, pride warming her despite the cold air. "Good," he pronounced as they returned to the cabin. "Quick learner." The praise, simple as it was, meant more coming from him than elaborate compliments ever had in her previous life. Nakohe didn't waste words on empty flattery. If he said she was learning well, She believed it to be true. Days turned to weeks, each one bringing new skills, new challenges, new adaptations. Sarah learned to identify animal tracks in the snow, to distinguish edible winter plants from poisonous. Lookalikes, to repair tears in clothing with sinew thread. Elizabeth grew stronger daily, her curious eyes taking in the world from the safety of her cradleboard, her cries becoming more differentiated. Hunger distinct from discomfort, discomfort from loneliness. The winter solstice approached, marked by increasingly short days. One evening, as they sat by the fire after Elizabeth had fallen asleep, Sarah broached a subject that had been growing in her mind. "Christmas is coming soon," she said. "At least, I think it must be. I've lost track." "Of the exact date," Nakohe nodded. 7 days until your winter ceremony." Sarah was surprised by his awareness of the Christian calendar. "You know about Christmas?" "Army fought. Missionaries there too." His tone was neutral, betraying neither approval nor disdain for the religion brought by settlers. "We should mark the day somehow," Sarah mused, more to herself than to him. "For Elizabeth's sake, even if she's too young to remember." Nakohe seemed to consider this, then rose and went to a small leather pouch hanging from a wall peg. From it he withdrew something small that he kept concealed in his palm as he returned to the fire. "For you," he said, extending his hand, "when time comes." In his palm lay a small, carved figure, a woman holding an infant, made from pine wood. And polished to a soft sheen, the craftsmanship was remarkable, the figures simplified yet unmistakably Sarah and Elizabeth. "You made this?" she asked, taking it carefully. "When?" "While you sleep. First days." He gestured to the carving. "Apache tradition. New life needs a guardian spirit. Carved symbols helps mothers stay strong." Sarah turned the piece in her hands, deeply moved by both the skill it represented and the thought behind it. This was what he had been working on that first morning, and likely many mornings since. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." Nakohe inclined his head in acknowledgement, then added, "Not a Christmas gift. Different meanings, but can serve both purposes if you wish." The sensitivity of this concession, allowing his cultural practice to accommodate hers without diminishing either, touched Sarah deeply. It exemplified something she was coming to recognize in him, a fundamental respect for different ways of understanding the world, even those that had caused his people suffering. "Tell me about your traditions," she asked, "for winter, for new life." He hesitated, and she wondered if she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality, more fluid, as if the subject allowed him to access language, in a way pragmatic instructions did not. Apache ways say winter is time of stories, time when old ones speak through the wind, time to remember who we are, where we come from. His eyes reflected the fire's glow. New life in winter is especially powerful. Shows creator's strength. Child born to snow will have a strong spirit, see the truth others miss. Sarah glanced at her sleeping daughter. "Is that true for all children born in winter, or just Apache children?" "All children," Nakohe replied without hesitation. "Spirit knows no boundaries white man makes." The answer surprised her, revealing a world-view both more inclusive and more profound than she had been taught to expect from savages. The casual bigotry of the wagon train conversations about native peoples felt suddenly shameful in memory. "What about your family?" she asked. "Do you have children somewhere?" His expression shuttered slightly. "Had a wife, son, many winters ago." The past tense told its own story. Sarah didn't press for details, recognizing from her own grief how some wounds are too deep for casual examination. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without inviting further discussion. After a moment of silence, he rose. Late now. Tomorrow hunt, if the weather holds. He moved to his sleeping area on the opposite side of the cabin. Rest well. As Sarah prepared for sleep, tucking the carved figure beside Elizabeth's cradle board, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had sat in church in Springfield, listening to warnings about the godless heathens of the territories. 2 months ago, she had huddled in a wagon, as William described, how they would build a prosperous new life with gold from the mountains. 1 month ago, she had been abandoned by civilized men to die alone. Now she lived in a one-room cabin with a man whose culture she had been taught to fear, learning survival from him, watching him cradle her daughter with gentle hands as he sang. Songs in a language she couldn't understand. The irony was not lost on her, that she had found more humanity in this supposed savage than in the Christians who had left her to die. Outside, the winter stars wheeled above the snow-covered valley, indifferent to human categories and judgments. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Elizabeth sighed in her sleep, tiny hands flexing. Across the cabin, Nahkohe's breathing deepened into the rhythm of rest. In this moment of quiet, Sarah felt something unexpected taking root within her. Not just gratitude or relief, but a fierce resolve. She would survive this winter. She would learn everything Nahkohe could teach her. She would ensure Elizabeth thrived despite the circumstances of her birth. And when spring came, bringing with it decisions about rejoining the world of settlements and wagon trains, she would face that choice not as a victim seeking rescue, but as a woman who had found strength in the last place she ever expected to. Look, Sarah Mitchell, abandoned by gold seekers and saved by a silent Apache tracker, closed her eyes and surrendered to sleep, the carved guardian figure watching over her daughter through the long winter night. January brought a bone-deep cold that tested the cabin's defenses. Frost formed on the inside of the window each night, creating delicate patterns that Elizabeth watched with fascination from her cradleboard. The snow outside had compacted and crusted, making each venture for firewood or hunting an exercise. In endurance, Sarah's transformation continued with each passing day. Her hands, once soft from a shopkeeper's wife's existence, grew calloused and confident. Her body, recovered from childbirth, developed new strength from daily tasks. The woman who had once needed help to climb into a wagon now moved through deep snow with practiced ease, collected firewood with methodical efficiency, and could gut a rabbit almost as quickly as Nahkohe. This particular morning she knelt by the fire, carefully scraping a deer hide with a bone tool Nahkohe had crafted for her. The methodical work was satisfying, transforming something raw into something useful through pure effort and attention. Elizabeth slept nearby, growing plump despite the harsh conditions, a testament to her mother's resilience. Nahkohe entered, bringing a blast of cold air and the day's bounty, 2 snowshoe hares, already field-dressed, and a cluster of wintergreen berries found on a south-facing slope where the snow had thinned. "Good hunting," Sarah observed, setting aside the hide. He nodded, hanging the hares on the drying rack. Tracks everywhere today, animals hungry after a storm. Their communication had evolved over the weeks, finding a middle ground between his sparse English and her growing vocabulary of Apache words. More significant than language, however, was their unspoken understanding, the ability to work together in the small space without collision, to anticipate each other's needs, to respect silence as much as speech. "The hide is nearly ready," Sarah said, gesturing to her work. "I think it will make good moccasins for Elizabeth when she's older." Nahkohe examined her work with a critical eye, then nodded approval. "Good scraping. Even depth. No thin spots." The praise warmed her more than the fire. Sarah had come to value his assessment, never offered lightly, never exaggerated, always precise in its focus on improvement rather than ego. "I've been thinking," she said, returning to her task. Elizabeth is almost 3 months old. In the spring, she'll need to be baptized. She hadn't spoken much about religion during their time together. The isolation and daily struggle for survival had pushed such concerns to the background. But as Elizabeth grew, Sarah found herself thinking more about the traditions she had been raised with, wondering how they fit into this new existence. Nakohe added wood to the fire before responding. Baptized? This is a water ceremony? Yes, Sarah explained, a blessing with water to welcome her into the church. He considered this. Apache have water ceremony too. Different meaning, same respect for new life. He gestured toward Elizabeth. Spirit already knows her, sees her strength, but ceremonies help people remember what matters. The quiet wisdom in his observation struck Sarah deeply. It was something William would never have understood or valued. This recognition that different paths might lead to similar truths. When spring comes, she began, then hesitated. The future beyond winter remained a nebulous, uncertain thing. Would they trek to a settlement? Would William somehow find them? Would Nakohe simply return to his solitary existence once they no longer needed his protection? Many decisions when snow melts, Nakohe said, seeming to read her thoughts. Not need answers now. Sarah nodded, grateful for his pragmatic approach. One day at a time had become her philosophy as well, focusing on immediate needs rather than distant uncertainties. The day proceeded with its usual rhythm: cooking, repairs, care for Elizabeth, preparation for tomorrow. As evening approached, Nakohe took out a small pouch of tobacco, a rare indulgence he allowed himself occasionally. He packed a simple pipe carved from stone, then paused, looking at Sarah with an uncharacteristic hesitation. Special day, he said finally. In Apache counting, 1 year since wife-son walked to the spirit world. The unexpected revelation stunned Sarah into silence. In all their time together, he had never shared such personal details, had mentioned his family only once in passing. "I'm so sorry," she said when she found her voice. "Was it sickness?" Nakohe's face remained composed, but something darkened in his eyes. "Army soldiers, new commander at fort, not honor agreements, say Apache steal cattle." "Not true." His hands tightened around the pipe. "Village punished. Many die." The stark simplicity of his account made it all the more devastating. Sarah tried to imagine the scale of such loss, and found she could not. "You survived," she said softly. "Was hunting, returned to ashes." He lit the pipe with a twig from the fire, the tobacco glowing red. "Not survive, just not die." The distinction pierced Sarah's heart. She understood it in a way she wouldn't have before her own losses, the difference between physical continuation and true living. "What were their names?" she asked, instinctively knowing that speaking the names of the dead was an act of honoring. Nakohe looked at her sharply, surprised by the question. After a moment he replied, "Wife called Naiche means mischievous one. Son called Chano, canyon spirit." "Naiche," Sarah repeated carefully. "Chano." She looked directly at him. "I would like to hear about them, if you wish to speak of them." For a long moment, Nakohe sat motionless, only the smoke from his pipe moving in the still air of the cabin. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality, softer, touched with something like wonder. Naiche laughed like a stream over stones, never afraid. "Teach me to see beauty in small things, spiderweb with dew, pattern in broken stick." He drew on the pipe, the ember brightening. "Chano only has 4 winters when walked to the spirit world. Already show hunter's eye. Already know plant names, already sing many songs." The memories seemed to flow more freely now, as if a dam had broken. Nakohe spoke of his wife's skill with beadwork, his son's talent for mimicking bird calls, the home they had made in his people's traditional territory before being forced onto reservation land near the fort. He described Nietzsche's defiance when soldiers came, how she had stood straight back before them, refusing to show fear. Sarah listened without interruption, recognizing the sacred nature of this sharing. When he finally fell silent, the pipe burned out. She asked only one question. "Is that why you live alone now, because of what happened?" Nakohe nodded slowly. "After burning, try living with your cousin's band. Too many ghosts in eyes of others, too many memories." He set the pipe aside. "Mountains better, silence speaks truth. Animals judge only by actions." "Until I arrived," Sarah observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Life has a strange path. Not for us to always understand." Elizabeth stirred then, waking with hungry cries. As Sarah tended to her daughter, Nakohe moved to the door. "Check snares," he said, though darkness had already fallen. Sarah understood he needed solitude after sharing such memories, and simply nodded as he disappeared into the night. Left alone with Elizabeth, Sarah found herself contemplating how fate had woven their lives together. A woman abandoned by civilization, a man who had lost everything to that same civilization's cruelty, finding unexpected sanctuary together in this remote cabin. There was a symmetry to it that felt almost deliberate, as if some greater wisdom had orchestrated their meeting. When Nakohe returned an hour later, something had shifted between them. A deeper understanding, a shared recognition of wounds carried and strength found in survival. They didn't speak of it directly, but it lived in the air between them, in the way they moved through the small space with new awareness of each other, not as merely rescuer and rescued, but as two people carrying similar burdens. The following weeks brought the deepest cold of winter, days when venturing outside required wrapping all exposed skin to prevent frostbite. The supplies Nakohe had accumulated proved crucial, allowing them to weather periods when hunting was impossible, and the only world they knew was the interior of the cabin. During these confined days, Nakohe began teaching Sarah more of his language, not as a formal lesson, but naturally, naming objects and actions as they worked. Sarah proved an apt student, her ear for sound patterns allowing her to reproduce the unfamiliar phonemes with reasonable accuracy. In exchange, she read aloud from her journal, sharing stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her courtship with William, the journey west that had led her to this place. "Your words paint pictures," Nakohe observed one evening, after she had described her father's general store in vivid detail. "Good storyteller." "My mother used to say the same thing," Sarah replied, surprised by the memory. "She said I noticed things others missed. Important skill, not just for stories, for survival too." He gestured toward the window, where darkness pressed against the glass. "See what is, not what you expect to see. Difference between life and death in the wilderness." It was a principle Sarah had observed in him from the beginning. His absolute attention to detail, his ability to read subtle signs in weather, animal behavior, plant conditions. She was learning this awareness gradually, finding that it changed how she experienced the world. Even confined to the cabin, she noticed more, the varying quality of light as it moved across the day, the different sounds of wind preceding, weather changes, the subtle signals in Elizabeth's expressions before she cried. February arrived with a temporary thaw, the temperature rising enough to turn the top layer of snow to slush during daylight hours before freezing again at night. The change created treacherous conditions, but also opportunity. Easier hunting as animals became more active, the chance to gather dormant plants exposed by melting snow, the ability to shore up parts of the cabin's exterior that had been inaccessible under deep drifts. On one such warmer day, Nakohe announced it was time for Elizabeth to experience the outside world properly. The baby, now almost 4 months old, had been outside only briefly since her birth, always bundled so completely that only her eyes were exposed to the elements. "Child need air, sun," he explained. "Good for spirit, good for body." Sarah was hesitant, the maternal instinct to protect warring with her trust in Nakohe's wisdom, but ultimately agreed. They wrapped Elizabeth warmly, but left her face uncovered, secured her in the cradle board, and ventured to a sheltered spot where the southern exposure had created a relatively dry patch of ground. There, they laid out a hide for sitting and, for the first time, placed Elizabeth directly on the earth, supported by furs. The baby's reaction was immediate and joyful. Wide eyes, taking in the vastness of sky, tiny hands reaching toward reflected light, small body wriggling with excitement at these new sensations. "She loves it," Sarah said, watching in wonder. As her daughter experienced the natural world for the first time, Nakohe nodded, a rare full smile transforming his face. Of course, born to wilderness, part of her spirit, the moment crystallized something Sarah had been feeling for weeks, that despite the circumstances of Elizabeth's birth, despite the hardships they had endured, her daughter was thriving in ways that might not have been possible in the life they had left behind. Here, Elizabeth's world was immediate and tactile, rich with natural sounds and rhythms, uncomplicated by the artifices of civilization. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said suddenly, watching as Elizabeth tracked the movement of a cloud shadow across the snow. "Not just for saving our lives, but for showing us how to live here." Nakohe shook his head. "No need for thanks between—" He hesitated, seemingly searching for the right word in English. "Between family." The word hung in the air between them, significant in its simplicity. They were not bound by blood or marriage, by legal document or social convention. Yet over these winter months, they had formed something that could only be described as family, a unit of mutual care, shared purpose, and deep respect. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the acknowledgement of what had grown in this isolated place. Before she could respond, however, Nakohe tensed beside her, his posture suddenly alert. "What is it?" she asked, immediately reaching for Elizabeth. "Listen," he said quietly. At first, Sarah heard nothing unusual, just the drip of melting snow, the distant call of a bird. Then it came to her, a faint, rhythmic sound, alien to the natural symphony of the wilderness. "Chopping," Nakohe said. "Axe on wood, far side of the ridge." Sarah's heart began to pound. "Settlers? This early in the season?" Nakohe shook his head. "Not settlers. Wrong approach." He rose fluidly, scanning the horizon. "Stay here. I'm going to see." "No," Sarah said firmly, gathering Elizabeth into her arms. "If it's dangerous, we stay together." He looked as if he might argue, then nodded once. "Follow exactly. Step where I step." Complete silence. They moved through the forest with painstaking care, Nakohe choosing a path that utilized natural cover. Dips in the terrain, dense stands of pine rock formations. Sarah followed precisely, her movements now practiced enough to maintain both silence and balance while carrying Elizabeth, who sensed the tension and remained unusually quiet. After nearly half an hour of cautious progress, they reached a vantage point on a small rise that overlooked a narrow valley. There, partially concealed among trees, stood a crude camp. 3 canvas tents, a fire pit, and a wagon with a broken wheel. 5 men moved about the site, 2 working on repairing the wheel, 1 chopping firewood, 2 sorting through supplies. "Prospectors," Nakohe said, his voice barely audible. "Early scouts for spring rush." Sarah studied the men from their hidden position, trying to determine if any were familiar. The distance was too great to be certain, but something about their movements, their arrangement, tickled at her memory. "The Caldwell brothers," she whispered suddenly. I think it's them, the men who abandoned me, and that man by the fire. That could be William. Nakohe's expression hardened. Your husband? Sarah nodded, a confusing whirl of emotions rising within her. Anger, fear, a strange sense of vindication at having survived despite their cruelty. Most surprising was the absence of joy or relief at potentially seeing William again. Instead, she felt only a cold assessment of what his presence might mean for her and Elizabeth. They're prospecting, she realized aloud. They must have wintered somewhere nearby and are getting an early start before the main rush. Dangerous, Nakohe observed. Still too early. Pass could close again with one storm. They watched in silence for several more minutes, taking in the details of the camp, the substantial supplies, the good quality tools, the repeating rifles propped against a tent. They did well for themselves, Sarah said bitterly, while leaving me to die. Nakohe turned to her, his dark eyes serious. What do you want now? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Your husband there, men who know you, could go to them. His face revealed nothing of his own preference, offering her a choice without influence. Sarah looked back at the camp, at the men who represented her former life, a life of subordination to William's dreams, of polite submission to men like the Caldwells, of navigating a society that valued women primarily as extensions of their husbands. She looked down at Elizabeth, peaceful in her arms, then at Nakohe, patient beside her. They left me to die, she said finally. They don't deserve to know we survived. Nakohe nodded, the faintest relief visible in his posture. Wise choice. Men who abandon have poison in spirit. Not safe for you, not safe for child. But we should watch them, Sarah continued, strategic thinking replacing emotional reaction. If they're here this early, others will follow soon. We need to know their movements, their plans. A glint of approval appeared in Nakohe's eyes. Think like Apache now. Knowledge is strength. They remained hidden, observing the camp until the light began to fade. As they watched, two of the men, including the one Sarah thought might be William, departed with rifles, presumably to hunt for the evening meal. The casual confidence of their movements spoke of men who felt entitled to whatever they could take from the land, who recognized no authority beyond their own desires. Enough for today, Nakohe said as shadows lengthened. Know where they are. Now, can watch the path from the cabin. See if you move closer. They retreated as carefully as they had approached, mindful of leaving no obvious tracks. By the time they reached the cabin, darkness had fallen completely, and Elizabeth was fussing for her evening feeding. Inside, as Sarah nursed her daughter by the rekindled fire, the reality of what they had discovered settled upon her. The world she had thought left behind until spring had suddenly encroached upon their sanctuary. The men who had abandoned her might be within a few hours' travel. The isolation that had become safe was now threatened. Will they find us here? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. Nakohe shook his head confidently. Valley hidden from usual paths. Cabin not visible unless. You know exactly where to look. He checked that the shutters were securely closed before continuing. But it's good to be cautious. No hunting near their camp, no large fires that make much smoke. Sarah nodded, mentally adjusting to this new reality. And if they do find us? Nakohe's expression grew solemn. Then we decide fight or flight, but not alone, together. The simple declaration contained volumes, a commitment to stand with her regardless of what came, a promise that she and Elizabeth would not face abandonment. Again, in that moment, Sarah recognized the true nature of what had grown between them over these winter months. Not merely gratitude on her part, not merely responsibility on his, but something deeper, a bond forged in shared survival, mutual respect, and growing affection. Together, she echoed, the word both acknowledgement and promise. Outside, the brief thaw was already ending, temperature dropping as night deepened. Inside, the fire cast golden light across the cabin's interior, illuminating this small family. Created not by convention, but by choice. A woman who had found her strength in adversity, a man who had found purpose after loss, and a child born to a wilderness that had proven more nurturing than civilization. The prospectors' camp brought new uncertainty to their future, but it could not diminish what they had built together in this hidden valley. Whatever came with the spring thaw, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty they would face it not as victim and rescuer, but as equal partners in a life that neither had anticipated, but both now cherished. The discovery of the prospectors' camp altered the rhythm of their days. Nakohe began regular scouting expeditions, tracking the men's movements while remaining undetected. Sarah kept Elizabeth quieter during daylight hours, minimizing the chance of her cries carrying through the crisp mountain air. They banked the fires more carefully, harvested wood from areas where falling trees wouldn't be heard, and maintained constant vigilance. Despite these precautions, their life together continued to deepen. February's brief thaw had retreated before winter's final stand, bringing heavy snow that once again isolated their valley. This natural barrier provided some reassurance, though Nakohe insisted on maintaining their cautious routine. March arrived with the first genuine signs of coming spring. Longer daylight hours, occasional birdsong from returning migrants, the sound of ice cracking on the stream that ran through their valley. Elizabeth, now 5 months old, grew more alert daily, her personality emerging in gummy smiles and determined wiggles. One clear morning, Sarah worked outside the cabin, scraping. A deer hide stretched on a frame. Her movements were practiced now, efficient without wasted effort. Nearby, Elizabeth lay on a buffalo robe in the sunshine, protected from the lingering snow by its thick fur. The baby kicked her legs energetically, fascinated by her own movement. Sarah paused in her work, observing her daughter with quiet wonder. Elizabeth bore little resemblance to William. Her eyes had darkened to a rich brown, her complexion had developed an olive undertone despite the winter pallor, and her expression held a watchfulness that reminded Sarah of Nakohe. "You're a mountain child," she murmured, touching Elizabeth's cheek. "Born in the wilderness." The sound of snowshoes on packed snow announced Nakohe's return from his morning patrol. He approached with his characteristic silent grace, carrying a bundle of freshly cut pine boughs. "Cabin roof needs reinforcing," he explained, setting down his burden. "Snow melting, then freezing again, makes heavy ice." Sarah nodded, returning to her scraping. "Did you see any sign of them?" "Tracks heading east," Nakohe replied. "2 men, maybe hunting. Not coming this way." The news brought both relief and continued tension. The prospectors seemed unaware of their presence in the adjacent valley, but any hunting party could stumble upon their cabin by accident. Nakohe crouched beside Elizabeth, who immediately focused on him with delighted recognition. Her small hands reached toward him, a gesture that never failed to soften his expression. "Strong today," he observed, letting her grasp his finger. "Soon crawling." "Too soon," Sarah said with a smile. "I'm not ready for her to be mobile in that." "Cabin?" Nakohe nodded seriously. "Need to make a safe place, like a cradle board, but bigger. Apache mothers use willow pen when babies start moving." The casual mention of future preparations, a child-safe enclosure for Elizabeth, repairs to the cabin roof, carried a deeper implication that neither addressed directly, an assumption that their life together would continue beyond the immediate crisis of winter survival. As Sarah finished her task and gathered the tools, she found herself contemplating this unspoken future. What had begun as rescue had evolved into partnership, then family. The prospect of returning to civilization, once her desperate hope, now filled her with ambivalence. "What happens when more come?" she asked suddenly. "Not just these. Men, but the main rush. Hundreds more prospectors, then settlers." Nakohe looked up from where he was examining the cabin roof. His expression was unreadable, but a new tension lined his shoulders. "Already happening east of the mountains," he said. "Towns growing, more soldiers, more fences. Will you leave? Go deeper into the mountains?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Sarah to Elizabeth and back. "Considered this many times. Before you came. Now." He left the thought unfinished. "Now there's us," Sarah said softly. Nakohe nodded once. "Changes all plans." The simple acknowledgement carried the weight of commitment. They hadn't spoken of love. The word itself seemed inadequate for what had developed between them. But the recognition of their interdependence, their mutual choice to remain together, constituted something perhaps more meaningful than conventional romance. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, gathering Elizabeth as they moved toward the cabin door. "If we need to leave this place, we should be prepared. We should have a destination in mind. Supplies ready." "Wise planning," Nakohe agreed. "Many possibilities. North, fewer people. West, rougher country but good hunting." Inside the cabin, he spread a rough map he had drawn on a piece of hide, showing the surrounding mountains, valleys, and waterways. As they discussed potential routes and locations, Sarah marveled at how naturally they worked together now, her practical organization complementing his wilderness knowledge, their communication fluid and efficient. The conversation shifted to immediate needs, which plants would emerge first with the thaw, how to ensure clean water during snowmelt flooding, the need to repair winter damage to traps and tools. As they spoke, the easy partnership they had developed over the winter months reasserted itself, pushing back the uncertainty brought by the prospector's presence. That evening, after Elizabeth had fallen asleep, Nakohe brought out a small leather pouch he had been working on during the quieter winter days. The soft buckskin was decorated with intricate beadwork in geometric patterns of blue and white. "For you," he said, offering it to Sarah. "Medicine bag, tradition for protection." Sarah accepted it with careful hands, admiring the precise beadwork. "It's beautiful. Did you make this entirely?" Nakohe nodded. "Beads were traded long ago, saved for an important purpose." She traced the pattern with her finger. "What do the designs mean?" "Blue for sky, father, white for mountain snow." "Pattern is an old one. It means a safe journey." He hesitated, then added, "Inside is special." Sarah carefully opened the pouch. Within lay several small objects: a polished stone, a hawk feather, a tiny bundle of dried herbs tied with sinew, and a small carved wooden disc with symbols etched into its surface. "Each has meaning," Nakohe explained. "Stone from a high place where spirits speak clearly, feather from hawk who sees far, herbs for healing the body, carving for the protection of child." The care represented by these gathered objects moved Sarah deeply. In her former life, gifts had been primarily decorative or practical: a hair ribbon, a new pot, a book of poetry. This medicine bag represented something more profound: symbolic protection woven from belief and connection to the natural world. "I'll keep it with me always," she promised, securing the drawstring and hanging the pouch from her belt. Nakohe nodded, satisfied. Good medicine works best when carried close. Their evening continued with its usual quiet routine: banking, the fire, securing the shutters, checking that Elizabeth was properly covered against the night chill. These small actions, performed hundreds of times over the winter months, had transformed from necessary tasks into a kind of ritual, markers of safety and continuity. As Sarah lay down to sleep, the medicine bag placed carefully beside her pallet, she reflected on how completely her understanding of home had changed. Once, it had meant her father's house in Pennsylvania. Then the small shopfront apartment she had shared with William in Springfield, then the elusive promise of a new life in gold country. Now, home was this one-room cabin, the valley that sheltered it, and most importantly, the small family they had created within its walls. The following week brought the first true thaw of spring, not the temporary warming of February, but a sustained shift in temperature that turned snow to slush and revealed patches of dormant grass on south-facing slopes. The stream swelled with meltwater, its banks overflowing in places, carrying winter's accumulation downward toward distant rivers. With the thaw came increased activity from the prospectors. Nakohe reported more frequent hunting parties, tree-cutting expeditions, and once, alarmingly, a group of 3 men who had crossed the ridge between the valleys, though they had turned back before coming within sight of the cabin. They prepare. For others coming, he explained after returning from a scouting trip. Building a bigger camp, more permanent. Sarah nodded, concern evident in her expression. How many now? 8 men total. More wagons arrived. Nakohe's face remained impassive, but tension radiated from him. Found gold in the stream. Not much, but enough to stay. The news confirmed Sarah's worst fears. As long as the prospectors found even minimal success, more would follow. Their peaceful valley might soon be surrounded by claim seekers, the isolation that had protected them giving way to the chaos of another gold rush. That night, they discussed contingency plans in low voices, Elizabeth sleeping nearby. They identified 3 possible retreat routes, each leading to more remote areas deeper in the mountains. They inventoried their supplies, determining what could be carried quickly if necessary. They established signals and meeting points in case they were separated. The planning was practical, even comforting in its thoroughness, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of grief. For the sanctuary they might lose, for the life they had built together, for the peace that had allowed Sarah to heal and Elizabeth to thrive. I won't lose another home, Sarah said finally, her voice quiet but determined, not without a fight. Nakohe studied her, noting the transformation from the desperate pregnant woman he had found in the snow to this fierce, capable mother. Sometimes fighting means leaving, he said gently. Sometimes it means staying hidden. Sometimes it means standing ground. Wisdom knows which is the right time for each. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. And what does wisdom tell you now? That we watch, we prepare, we decide when the moment comes. He reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his, a rare initiation of physical contact. Together. The touch was both reassurance and promise, his calloused palm warm against hers. Sarah interlaced her fingers with his, the simple contact grounding her against uncertainty. Together, she echoed. The moment lingered, intimate and significant. Then Elizabeth stirred, breaking the spell. They moved apart naturally, returning to practical tasks, but something had shifted, an acknowledgement of what had been growing between them for months. Spring's advance accelerated in the following days. Snowbanks retreated to shady hollows, exposing the dormant earth beneath. The first green shoots appeared in protected areas, wild onions, early wildflowers, fresh grass. Birds returned in greater numbers, their morning chorus growing more complex daily. Nakohe taught Sarah to identify the edible early plants, showing her which roots could be harvested before leaves appeared, which bark could be stripped for medicinal teas. They worked side by side, replenishing supplies depleted during winter, preparing for the abundant growth to come. Elizabeth thrived in the milder weather, spending more time outdoors on her buffalo robe, watching clouds move across the expanding patches of blue sky. Her attempts at mobility grew more determined, rolling from back to stomach, pushing up on her arms, rocking on hands and knees with focused concentration. Strong will, Nakohe observed one afternoon as he worked on repairing a damaged trap. while Sarah sorted through winter garments, setting aside those that needed mending. "Spirit knows what it wants," Sarah smiled, watching her daughter's determined efforts. "She's stubborn, like her mother, my own mother, would say." "Good quality for survival," he replied. "Stubborn means not giving up when the path is difficult." The day observation was typical of Nakohe, finding virtue in traits that settled society might consider flaws, particularly in women. Throughout their months together, he had consistently valued Sarah's strength, intelligence, and determination, never suggesting she should be less than she was. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp bird call, 3 rapid notes followed by silence. Nakohe immediately tensed, setting aside his work. "Stay here," he said, rising fluidly. "Keep Elizabeth quiet." The bird call came again, not a natural sound, but a signal they had established. One of the perimeter warnings Nakohe had created during the winter had been triggered. Someone was approaching the valley. Sarah gathered Elizabeth quickly, moving to the shadowed interior of the cabin where she would be invisible from outside. Her heart pounded, but her movements remained controlled, efficient. Months of preparation had instilled habits of caution and readiness. Nakohe disappeared silently into the forest, moving toward the source of the warning. Sarah waited, counting breaths to remain calm, gently soothing Elizabeth, who sensed the tension and began to fuss. The minutes stretched endlessly, each sound from the forest, a branch creaking, a distant bird call, the rush of the stream, amplified by her heightened awareness. When Nakohe finally returned, almost an hour later, his expression was grim. "2 men," he reported, "hunters from Prospector Camp, following the deer trail that comes near the cabin." "Did they see you? Or the cabin?" Sarah asked, still holding Elizabeth close. "No. Changed their path before they came this far." He knelt beside her, his voice lowering. "But one is the man you called husband." The confirmation of William's presence hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had suspected, even been relatively certain after their first sighting of the camp, but hearing it confirmed made it undeniably real. "You're sure?" she asked. Nakohe nodded. "Got close enough to see face clearly. Heard others call name." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. What was he doing exactly? Hunting with other man, older one with a grey beard? Not finding much. Complaining about territory already trapped out. Nakohe's tone was neutral, reporting facts rather than emotion. "They turned back toward their camp, but I will hunt again, maybe come closer next time." The implication was clear. Their security was compromised. It might be days or weeks before they were discovered, but with hunters regularly crossing the ridge, discovery was now inevitable rather than merely possible. "We need to decide," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Stay or leave." Nakohe settled beside her, his nearness providing unspoken support. "What does your heart say?" The question surprised her. She had expected him to advocate for immediate departure, for the cautious approach that had kept him alive in increasingly hostile territory. Instead, he was trusting her judgment, acknowledging her equal stake in their decision. Sarah looked down at Elizabeth, then around the cabin that had sheltered them through winter, that had transformed from mere survival to genuine home. "I don't want to run," she said finally. "Not yet. This is our place, not theirs." Nakohe studied her face, then nodded once, accepting her decision. "Then we make it safer, harder to find." The next days were devoted to increasing their security. They camouflaged the cabin more effectively, using branches and earth to break up its silhouette. They created a hidden storage cache for their most essential supplies, buried beneath a boulder a quarter-mile from the cabin. They established multiple escape routes, each marked with subtle signs only they would recognize. Most significantly, they dug a small root cellar beneath the cabin floor, a space just large enough for Sarah and Elizabeth to hide if strangers approached while Nakohe was absent. The work was exhausting but purposeful, each improvement increasing their chances of remaining undetected. Throughout these preparations, their partnership deepened further. They moved in unconscious synchronization, anticipating each other's needs. Communication often reduced to glances and gestures. The shared purpose, protecting their small family, cemented what had been building between them all winter. On the evening after they completed the root cellar, as they sat by the fire, sharing a meal of fresh rabbit stew enriched with early spring greens, Nakohe broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. "If they find us, your husband, others, what will you say?" Sarah had considered this possibility many times, imagining the confrontation, the accusations, the demands that would surely follow discovery. She had rehearsed explanations and justifications, preparing for William's anger or the Caldwells' and threats. "The truth," she said simply, "that they abandoned me to die, that you saved me and Elizabeth, that we have made a life here." Nakohe nodded slowly. "And if they demand you return, say the child belongs with father?" The question touched the core of her fears, not for herself, but for Elizabeth, for the family they had created. In the world beyond their valley, what rights would a woman abandoned by her husband have? What authority might William claim over his daughter, regardless of his earlier actions? "Elizabeth is mine," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "Mine, and yours in all the ways that matter. William lost any claim to her when he left me to die with her still in my womb." She reached across the small space between them, taking Nakohe's hand as he had taken hers days before. "And I belong to myself, not to William, not to any man who would treat life so carelessly." Nakohe's fingers tightened around hers, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Among Apache, when man abandons family, he loses place, cannot return and demand rights he threw away." "That seems wiser than white man's law," Sarah replied. "But we're not in a settlement or a fort. Out here, there is only the law we make ourselves." The understanding that passed between them in that moment transcended words, a recognition that they stood together against whatever came, that the bonds they had formed through winter's trials were stronger than legal documents or social conventions. Later, as Sarah nursed Elizabeth before sleep, she found herself contemplating the strange journey that had brought her to this place. The abandonment that had seemed a death sentence had instead opened a door to a life more authentic than any she had known before. The man her society had taught her to fear as savage had shown more humanity, more respect, more genuine partnership than the husband she had followed west. Outside, the night was alive with spring sounds, the gurgle of the swollen stream, the call of a hunting owl, the rustling of wind through branches now budding with new growth. Inside, the cabin held their small family in its protective embrace, the fire burning low and steady, Elizabeth's breathing soft in the dimness. Sarah met Nakohe's gaze across the fire, no words necessary to communicate what they both felt. That whatever storms approached with the prospector's presence, the foundation they had built together would stand firm. Not merely survival, but a life chosen with clear eyes and full hearts. The world beyond their valley might have its own ideas about their unconventional family, its own judgments about a white woman and an Apache man raising a child together. But in this moment, in this place, they had made their own. Those outside opinions held no power. They had survived winter. They had found each other, and together they would face whatever spring brought to their mountain sanctuary. April brought the full awakening of the mountain landscape. Meadows emerged from snowmelt, carpeted in wildflowers. Streams ran high with crystalline water, and trees unfurled tender green leaves. The renewal might have been beautiful, if not for the growing threat beyond the ridge. The prospector's camp had expanded to a small settlement. Nakohe reported 12 tents now, more wagons, the beginnings of rough wooden structures. Worse, they had found enough gold in the streams to attract attention. Twice weekly, riders departed east, presumably to spread word of their discovery. It was only a matter of time before the trickle of gold seekers became a flood. Sarah and Nakohe maintained their vigilance, limiting outdoor activities to dawn and dusk, keeping fires small, setting additional warning signals along likely approach routes. Elizabeth, now 6 months old, had begun crawling with surprising speed, requiring constant attention to keep her from the various hazards of their rugged home. This particular morning, Sarah knelt in the small garden they had established, near the cabin, transplanting wild onion bulbs she had gathered from the forest edge. The domestication of wild plants was her own innovation, an attempt to reduce the need for foraging expeditions that might be observed by hunters. Elizabeth lay nearby in the willow enclosure Nakohe had constructed, happily exploring a collection of safe natural objects, smooth stones, feathers, a piece of soft deerskin. Her dark hair had grown into wispy curls, her cheeks round with health despite their winter isolation. Sarah paused in her work, watching her daughter with quiet pride. Against all odds, Elizabeth was thriving. More than that, she was developing a connection to this place, to the natural world around her that few children ever experienced. Her first words, when they came, might well be in Apache rather than English, a thought that would have horrified Sarah a year ago, but now seemed perfectly right. The sound of Nakohe's return drew her attention. He emerged from the forest, not with his usual silent grace, but with purposeful haste, his expression tight with concern. "Inside," he said without preamble. "Now." Sarah didn't question, immediately gathering Elizabeth and the few gardening tools. Within moments, they were in the cabin, shutters closed, the door secured with the heavy wooden bar they had crafted for emergencies. "What is it?" Sarah asked, settling Elizabeth on her hip. "Prospectors crossing ridge," Nakohe replied, checking that his knife and tomahawk were secure at his belt. "5 men, armed, following the game trail that leads here." Sarah's heartbeat quickened. Could it be a coincidence? Just hunting? No. Nakohe certainly was chilling. Man in lead is your husband, moving with purpose, looking for something. The confirmation sent ice through Sarah's veins. Somehow, William had learned of their presence, or at least suspected it. The confrontation they had prepared for was no longer theoretical, but imminent. "How long?" she asked, her mind racing through their practiced contingency plans. "Less than an hour if keep same pace." Nakohe moved to the rear of the cabin, lifting the trap door that concealed their root cellar. "You and Elizabeth hide. I lead away from the cabin." Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, we decided together, remember. I won't cower in a hole while you face them alone." Nakohe's expression softened slightly despite the urgency. "Brave heart, but the child needs protection. Elizabeth will be safer in the cave," Sarah countered, referring to their emergency shelter half a mile distant, a natural formation they had stocked with supplies. "We have time to reach it if we leave now, using the stream bed route." For a moment, Nakohe seemed about to argue, then nodded sharply. "Wise choice? Take essentials only. I follow after setting a false trail." The practiced efficiency they had developed served them well now. Within minutes, Sarah had gathered their emergency packs, food, water, extra clothing for Elizabeth, the medical supplies they couldn't afford to lose. Nakohe quickly obscured signs of their recent presence around the cabin, scattering the garden soil to make it look untended, arranging branches to hide the path to the stream. "Go now," he urged, helping secure Elizabeth in her carrier on Sarah's back. "Follow water exactly as practiced. Leave no tracks on banks." Sarah hesitated at the door, suddenly overwhelmed by the possibility that this departure might be permanent, that they might never return to the home they had shared through winter's darkest days. "Wait for me at the cave," Nakohe said, reading her expression. 2 hours. If not, use the North Passage to reach a higher valley. Sarah nodded, forcing practicality to overcome emotion. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture that had come to convey everything words could not. Then she was gone, moving swiftly through the underbrush toward the stream, Elizabeth secured against her back. The water route was their most secure escape path. Walking directly in the shallow edges of the stream left no tracks for even skilled trackers to follow. Sarah moved carefully but quickly, stepping on stones where possible, keeping to the water otherwise. Elizabeth, accustomed to being carried, remained mercifully quiet, lulled by the rhythm of movement and the gurgling water. Journey took nearly 40 minutes of careful progress. The cave entrance, concealed behind a stand of young aspen trees, was invisible until one stood directly before it. Sarah slipped inside, immediately feeling the temperature drop in the shadowed interior. The space was not large but sufficient. Perhaps 15 feet deep and 8 feet wide at its widest point. The ceiling just high enough for her to stand upright. Their preparations were evident in the carefully arranged supplies, a small store of dried meat and fruit, water in wooden canteens, extra blankets, a tinderbox with kindling. Sarah settled, Elizabeth, on a prepared bed of soft furs, then positioned herself near the entrance where she could observe the approach without being seen. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified, birds calling, wind through branches, the distant rush of the stream. Elizabeth grew restless, requiring attention and soothing. An hour passed, then nearly 2. Sarah's anxiety mounted with each. A minute Nakohe remained absent. Just as she was preparing to enact the next phase of their emergency plan, the retreat to the higher valley, a soft bird call sounded outside the cave. The specific pattern, 3 notes, pause, 2 notes, was their arranged signal. Nakohe had returned. He slipped into the cave moments later, moving with the controlled haste of someone with urgent news. They found a cabin, he reported, without preamble. Searching inside now, Sarah's heart sank. Did they see you? No, set a false trail first, then circled back to watch. He settled beside her at the cave entrance, his breathing only slightly elevated despite what must have been a rapid journey. 5 men. Your husband leads. 2 others recognized. Men who abandoned you. Others are new. How did they find us? Sarah asked, trying to imagine what could have given away their careful concealment. Hunt sign, Nakohe explained. Winter traps, cut wood, found enough small markers to follow. His expression showed no recrimination, only pragmatic assessment. Skilled tracker among them now, not just gold seekers. The implication was clear. Their presence had been suspected, then confirmed by someone with wilderness experience beyond the average prospector. The hunter had become the hunted. What will they do? Sarah asked, trying to anticipate their next challenge. Search the cabin thoroughly. Find signs of women and child. Nakohe's gaze was steady. Will not stop looking now. The reality settled between them. This was not a danger they could evade through temporary hiding. The prospectors, led by William, would search until they found them. We should leave, Sarah said. Use the higher passes to cross into the next range. Nakohe considered this, then shook his head slowly. Snow still deep in high passes. Dangerous. With child, and they have horses now, can travel faster, wider. Then what? Sarah fought to keep desperation from her voice. We can't hide forever, not with them actively searching. No, Nakohe agreed. Not hide, confront. The proposal startled her. Confront them? 5 armed men? On our terms, he clarified. Choose a place. Choose time. Speak truth before violence forces answer. Sarah considered this, recognizing the wisdom in controlling the circumstances of their inevitable meeting, rather than being discovered at a disadvantage. Still, The thought of facing William, of seeing the men who had abandoned her to die, sent cold fear through her veins. What if they try to take Elizabeth, or harm you? The questions emerged from her deepest fears. Words first, Nakohe said, firmly. Violence only if they choose it. He reached out, taking her hand in his. Trust our strength together. Looking into his calm, determined eyes, Sarah found her resolve strengthening. They had survived winter together. They had built a life from nothing. They had become a family bound by choice rather than obligation. If they must defend that family now, they would do so united. Together, she agreed. They spent the remaining daylight in the cave, planning their approach. Rather than waiting to be discovered, they would initiate contact at a location of their choosing, an open meadow 1/2 mile from the cabin, visible enough for clarity, but with forest edges nearby for retreat if necessary. Nakohe would scout the prospectors' movements through the night, determining when they were most likely to return to the search area. As darkness fell, they shared a small meal of jerky and dried berries, speaking little but drawing comfort from proximity. Elizabeth slept peacefully between them, unaware of the danger gathering around her small family. If something happens to me, Nakohe said suddenly, breaking the extended silence, you take the North Passage, 3 days' journey to Ute territory. Ask for Standing Elk. Tell him Nakohe sends family. He will help. The contingency plan pierced. Sarah's carefully maintained composure. Nothing will happen to you, she insisted. We'll face them together, and they'll leave us in peace. Nakohe's expression was gentle, but uncompromising. Hope for the best outcome. Prepare for worst. It is a way of survival. When he departed to track the prospectors, Sarah held him a moment longer than usual, her hands gripping the rough fabric of his shirt. The embrace contained everything unsaid between them, the gratitude, the respect, the deep affection that had grown through shared survival. The night passed in fragments of uneasy sleep and watchful waiting. Elizabeth woke twice, hungry and disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Sarah soothed her with quiet songs and stories, maintaining outward calm despite her inner turmoil. Dawn approached with pearlescent light, filtering through the cave entrance. Nakohe returned as promised, bearing news that shaped their plan. They camped near the cabin, he reported. Will resume searching at first light, moving in patterns outward from the cabin. We'll reach the meadow by mid-morning. Sarah nodded, rising to prepare. She dressed Elizabeth warmly, fed her, then secured her in the carrier. Her own preparations were simple but symbolic. She braided her hair in a single plait down her back, donned the buckskin dress Nakohe had helped her make during winter, and hung the medicine pouch prominently at her waist. Looking at her reflection in a small pool of water near the cave entrance, Sarah barely recognized the woman she had become. The soft, uncertain preacher's daughter from Pennsylvania had been replaced by someone leaner, stronger, with sun-darkened skin and clear, determined eyes. Even her posture had changed, spine straight, shoulders back, chin lifted. She stood like someone who had faced death and chosen life, someone who had found her own power in wilderness and adversity. "Ready?" Nakohe asked, returning from a final scout of their planned route. Sarah nodded. "Ready?" They moved through the awakening forest with practiced stealth, avoiding game trails where the prospectors might be searching. The meadow, when they reached it, was bathed in early morning light, wildflowers nodding in a gentle breeze, dew still glistening on grass stems. Under different circumstances, it would have been purely beautiful. Nakohe led them to the northern edge, where a large boulder provided both landmark and partial shelter. From this position, they could observe multiple approach routes while maintaining access to the forest behind them. "Now we wait," he said, settling into the still patience that had initially seemed alien to Sarah, but that she had gradually adopted as her own. The wait was shorter than anticipated. Within an hour, voices carried across the meadow, men calling to each other, coordinating their search. Sarah tensed as the first figure emerged from the trees on the opposite side, a tall man with a rifle cradled in his arms, beard longer than she remembered, face leaner. William. Behind him came Robert Caldwell, then three men she didn't recognize. They moved with the confidence of those who believed themselves hunters rather than intruders, calling back and forth about tracks and signs. Sarah stepped forward deliberately, positioning herself in clear view beside the boulder. Nakohe remained slightly behind her, visible but non-threatening, one hand resting lightly on his belt near his knife. The movement caught William's attention immediately. He stopped, rifle lifting instinctively before he registered what he was seeing. Even across the distance, Sarah could read the shock that transformed his features, disbelief, confusion, then a dawning recognition that seemed to age him instantly. "Sarah?" His voice carried clearly through the still morning air. "My God, Sarah!" She didn't respond, holding her ground as the men approached cautiously. William lowered his rifle, moving ahead of the others with increasing speed, his expression shifting from shock to something like joy. "You're alive!" he called. "We thought you were dead!" The others followed more warily, Robert Caldwell's face particularly guarded. As they drew closer, William's pace slowed, his eyes taking in her appearance, her stance, then finally Nakohe behind her and the child carrier on her back. "Sarah?" Uncertainty crept into his voice. "What's happened to you?" When she finally spoke, Sarah's voice was steady, carrying clearly across the diminishing distance between them. "Stop there, William, that's close enough." He halted about 20 feet away, hurt and confusion replacing his initial relief. "Sarah, it's me, your husband." "I know who you are," she replied evenly. "All of you." Her gaze swept deliberately to Robert Caldwell, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We've been searching for you," William said, taking another step forward despite her warning. "When I returned to the wagon train and found you gone—" "Found me gone." Sarah couldn't keep the bitter edge from her voice. "Is that what they told you? That I wandered off? Got lost?" William glanced at Robert Caldwell, uncertainty creeping into his expression. "They said there was an accident. The wagon couldn't make it through the pass with the storm coming. You were supposed to wait at the camp for me to return." The fabrication was worse than Sarah had imagined. Not just abandonment, but a coordinated lie to conceal their actions from William. Her gaze locked on Robert Caldwell, who shifted uneasily under her scrutiny. "There was no accident," she said clearly. "No camp. They forced me out of the wagon at gunpoint, left me with nothing but a thin blanket and a few days' worth of food, while I was 8 months pregnant." William's face was drained of color. He turned to Robert Caldwell, who immediately began a defensive justification. "Now hold on," Caldwell said. "That's not how it happened. We were all going to die if we didn't lighten the load. We did what we had to do. You left a pregnant woman to die in a snowstorm." Sarah cut in, her voice sharp as flint. "Let's not pretend it was anything else." William seemed to be struggling to process this revelation, his gaze moving between Sarah and the Caldwells. "You told me she chose to wait behind," he said to Robert, voice hollow with dawning understanding. "You said she had shelter, supplies." "We had to make it through the pass," Thomas Caldwell spoke up from behind his brother. "The claim wouldn't have waited. You know that, Mitchell." The naked calculation in his voice, weighing a woman's life against gold, hung in the air between them. William flinched as if struck, the full implications of their actions finally registering. In the silence that followed, Elizabeth chose that moment to make her presence known, a small sound of discontent rising from the carrier on Sarah's back. William's attention snapped to the source, his eyes widening as he realized what he was seeing. "Is that—" he began, unable to complete the question. Sarah shifted, bringing Elizabeth around to her front, allowing William to see his daughter for the first time. The baby blinked in the bright meadow light, her dark eyes curious, one small hand reaching for a strand of her mother's hair. "This is Elizabeth," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly, "born during the storm the night after they abandoned me." William took an involuntary step forward, wonder and grief mingling in his expression. "My daughter, she survived." "No thanks to you or your partners," Sarah replied. "We survived because of him." She gestured to Nakohe, who had remained silent. Throughout the exchange, watchful and ready. For the first time, William seemed to truly register Nakohe's presence. His expression shifted from wonder to wariness, then to something darker as he took in their proximity, their matched buckskin clothing, the clear unity in their stance. "You've been living with an Indian?" The question contained multitudes. Accusation, disbelief, a husband's possessive outrage. "I've been living with the man who saved my life and your daughter's," Sarah corrected sharply. "Who built us shelter, who hunted food for us, who delivered Elizabeth when I was alone and dying in the snow." William struggled visibly with this information, his gaze moving from Sarah to Elizabeth to Nakohe with increasing agitation. Behind him, the other men exchanged glances, hands shifting to rest near weapons. "Sarah, whatever happened, it's over." "Now," William said, visibly trying to regain control of the situation, "we can go back to the camp. We have a proper tent, supplies. You and the baby will be comfortable there until we return to the settlement." The presumption that she would simply abandon everything and return to him, that the past months could be erased with a tent and supplies, struck Sarah as so fundamentally misguided that she almost laughed. "No, William," she said simply, "we're not going anywhere with you." His face hardened, the initial joy at finding her alive transforming into something uglier. "She's my daughter, Sarah. My blood." "Your blood," Sarah acknowledged. "But not your child. Not anymore. You lost that right when you chose gold over your family." One of the unknown men stepped forward, a weathered frontiersman with cold eyes. "Mitchell, this is getting us nowhere. The woman's clearly gone native. Take the child and be done with it." Nakohe moved then, a subtle shift in posture that radiated coiled readiness. His hand remained near his knife, but he made no aggressive move. His voice when he spoke was calm, but carried an unmistakable warning. "Child stays with the mother," he said. "Mother chooses her path now." William's expression darkened further at Nakohe's intervention. "This doesn't concern you, Indian." "That's my wife and my daughter. Wife you abandoned to die," Nakohe replied evenly. "Daughter you never saw born, both living now because of choices I made, not you." The simple truth of the statement hung in the air between them, undeniable even in William's growing anger. His gaze shifted to the other prospectors, seeking support, or perhaps permission for what he contemplated next. Robert Caldwell stepped forward, rifle still held casually but clearly prepared. "Look, we don't want trouble, but that child is white, and she belongs with her father and her people." "Her people," Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "Her people are those who cherished her life enough to protect it. Her people are those who saw her value beyond convenience or profit." She held Elizabeth closer, the baby now sensing the tension and growing restless. "If you try to take her from me, you'll have to kill me first." The declaration silenced the meadow. Even the birds seemed to pause in their morning songs, the only sound the gentle rustle of grass in the breeze. In that stretched moment, the lines were drawn with perfect clarity. Not white against Apache, not civilization against wilderness, but those who had abandoned facing those who had remained. William's face worked through a complex series of emotions: anger, loss, confusion, and finally a resignation tinged with genuine grief. "Sarah," he said, his voice lower now, almost pleading, "you can't mean to stay here in the wilderness with him." He couldn't bring himself to acknowledge. Nakohe directly, "What kind of life is that for our daughter?" The question deserved an answer. and Sarah gave it without hesitation. A life of integrity, of respect, of understanding the true value of things beyond gold or status. She looked directly at her husband, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. A life where she learns that people matter more than possessions, where promises are kept, not discarded when inconvenient. William flinched as if struck, recognition of his own failures evident in his expression. For a moment, something like the man she had once loved showed through the gold fever that had consumed him. "I searched for you," he said quietly. "When I returned, they told me you were waiting at a camp that didn't exist. I went back along the trail. The snow had covered everything. Yet here you are," Sarah observed. "Back to your claim, back to your gold." He had no answer for that, the simple truth landing between them with finality. Whatever search he had conducted had been insufficient, his grief for her temporary, his return to the pursuit of wealth inevitable. The frontiersman who had spoken earlier shifted impatiently. "This is getting us nowhere, Mitchell. Make a decision." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Violence lingered as a possibility in the air between them, in the hands that rested on weapons, in the hardening eyes of men who had already demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice a woman's life for convenience. William Mitchell stood frozen in indecision, caught between the expectations of the men behind him and the unrecognizable woman who stood before him. His wife transformed by wilderness and adversity into someone with an authority he had never seen in her before. "She's made her choice." "Oh, clear enough," the frontiersman said, his hand moving deliberately to his revolver. "Time to end this nonsense." Before the man could draw, Nakohe moved with fluid precision. A knife appeared in his hand, not brandished as a threat, but held with the casual confidence of someone who could use it with devastating effect. "Think carefully," Nakohe said, his voice level despite the escalating tension. "4 of you might die before I fall. Which ones are willing to pay that price?" The crude calculation hung in the air, forcing each prospector to consider whether they valued William's claim to his daughter enough to risk their lives. Sarah stood unmoving beside Nakohe, one hand protectively covering Elizabeth's head. Her face resolute. "Wait." William raised his hand, halting the frontiersman's movement toward his weapon. Something had shifted in his expression, the anger giving way to confusion, then to a reluctant understanding. "Just wait." He took a step forward, then deliberately laid his rifle on the ground between them, a gesture of temporary truce. "Can I at least see her?" he asked, his voice stripped of demand, revealing the genuine grief beneath. "My daughter. Just once." Sarah hesitated, studying the man she had once pledged to follow across a continent. Despite everything, she saw in him not just the gold fever that had consumed him, but the remnants of the earnest shopkeeper she had married in Springfield, a man capable of love, however flawed his expression of it. She glanced at Nakohe, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. His knife remained ready, but he would respect her decision. "Come forward," Sarah said to William. Alone, slowly. William approached with visible restraint, his movements careful, eyes fixed on the small figure in Sarah's arms. The other prospectors watched warily, hands still near weapons, but following his lead for the moment. When he stood just a few feet away, Sarah turned Elizabeth toward him, allowing her former husband to see his daughter's face clearly. For the first time, the baby regarded this stranger with curious dark eyes, one small hand clutching her mother's buckskin dress. "She has your mother's chin," William said softly, wondering momentarily about overcoming all else. He reached out instinctively, then stopped, looking to Sarah for permission. After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded. William's fingertips gently touched Elizabeth's hand, which immediately closed around his index finger with the strong grip of healthy infancy. The simple contact seemed to break something in him. his face crumpling with an emotion too complex to name. "I thought you were both dead," he whispered. "For months, I thought." "Yet you returned to the gold," Sarah observed, not unkindly, but with unflinching honesty. "Even believing we had died because of it, you came back to these mountains." William couldn't meet her eyes, the truth of her assessment evident in his expression. "I told myself it was what you would have wanted, that your sacrifice shouldn't be for nothing." "It wasn't a sacrifice, William. It was an abandonment." Sarah's voice remained steady. "And what I would have wanted was a husband who chose his family over his ambitions." Elizabeth, tiring of the stranger's touch, turned her face into her mother's chest, seeking familiar comfort. William withdrew his hand slowly, the reality of his daughter's complete unfamiliarity with him striking deeper than any accusation. "What happens now?" he asked, looking not at the other prospectors, but at Sarah alone. "Now you make a choice," Sarah replied, "the same choice that was made for me that day on the trail." William looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You can force a confrontation here, risk lives, yours, theirs, ours, to claim what legal right says belongs to you." Sarah's gaze was unwavering. "Or you can recognize that some bonds are forged by action, not by paper or name, that Elizabeth is thriving with the family that chose to protect her when others chose gold." The weight of the decision seemed to physically press upon William, his shoulders slumping as he glanced back at the impatient prospectors, then to Nakohe's watchful stance, and finally to the child now nestled against her mother. "The others won't accept just walking away," he said quietly, pragmatic even in emotional turmoil. "There's too much at stake in their minds." "Gold has always made men foolish," Nakohe observed, speaking directly to William for the first time. "Makes them forget what holds true value." Something in the simple statement seemed to resonate with William. He studied Nakohe more carefully now, seeing beyond the surface differences to the evident character beneath. The steadiness, the protective stance, the clear bond with Sarah and Elizabeth. "You've cared for them," William said, a statement rather than a question. "All winter." Nakohe nodded once. "They are my family now." The claim, spoken without apology or qualification, might have provoked anger from another man. Instead, William seemed to accept it as simple truth, his gaze returning to Sarah with new understanding. "You love him," he said quietly. Sarah didn't flinch from the observation. "I found something I never knew existed before, a partnership of equals, respect that doesn't diminish with circumstance." She looked directly at her former husband. "Yes, I love him, and he loves us. Not as possessions, but as companions, on the same path." The honesty between them created a moment of unexpected clarity, a recognition of how completely their paths had diverged, how the young couple that had left Springfield no longer existed in any meaningful way. "Mitchell!" Robert Caldwell called impatiently. "What's the hold-up? Bring the child and let's be done with this." William turned back to the prospectors, something resolving in his expression. Whatever internal struggle he had faced seemed to reach its conclusion as he straightened his shoulders. "No," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "There will be no taking by force today." The frontiersman spat on the ground. "Gone soft over a squaw and a half-breed baby. That's your blood, man." "That's my daughter," William corrected sharply. "And she's alive because of these people while we were digging in streams for dust." He turned back to Sarah. "I won't pretend to understand the life you've chosen, but I won't destroy it either." Relief washed through Sarah, though she maintained her cautious stance. "What will you tell them?" she asked, nodding toward the increasingly agitated prospectors. William considered this. "The truth, I suppose. That my wife and child died in the mountains. That searching for ghosts won't bring gold or peace. The fiction he proposed, that Sarah and Elizabeth had indeed perished as the Caldwells had originally claimed, offered a resolution that might satisfy the prospectors' pragmatic concerns, while allowing her family to remain undisturbed. "They won't believe you easily," Sarah warned, glancing at the Caldwells who had the most to lose if their abandonment became known. "Perhaps not," William acknowledged, "but gold fever makes men forget quickly. There are richer claims to be staked, easier fortunes to chase." A ghost of his former smile appeared. "I've become something of an expert in the power of gold to redirect attention." The self-awareness in his observation surprised her. Perhaps the months of believing his family dead had changed him more than was immediately apparent. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Will you continue the search for gold?" William looked out across the meadow, seeming to see beyond it, to some internal landscape. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's consumed so much already. Lives, relationships, honor." He met her gaze again. "But old habits don't die easily." Nakohe, who had been silently observing their exchange, spoke unexpectedly. "Man can change path at any moment. Each sunrise offers a new direction. Question is whether he sees it." The simple wisdom seemed to strike William deeply. He nodded slowly, then extended his hand to Nakohe, a gesture that crossed cultural boundaries with its clear intent. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saving them when I failed to." Nakohe regarded the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it with dignity, the brief handshake sealing an unexpected peace between them. "Mitchell," Thomas Caldwell called. "This is taking too long. What's happening?" William turned back toward the prospectors. "I'm coming," he called, then lowered his voice for Sarah and Nakohe alone. "I'll lead them away from this valley. Make sure they understand there's nothing here worth returning for." He hesitated, looking at Elizabeth one last time. "Will you tell her about me someday?" "Yes," Sarah promised. "The truth. All of it. The good and the bad, the failures and the redemption. She deserves her whole story." William nodded, accepting this as fair. "Goodbye, Sarah." He reached out, touching Elizabeth's head gently. "Goodbye, daughter." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back toward the increasingly restless prospectors. Sarah and Nakohe watched as he retrieved his rifle, then engaged in intense conversation with the others. There were raised voices gesturing toward Sarah, but William remained firm. Eventually, with obvious reluctance, the group began to withdraw toward the forest edge from which they had emerged. William looked back once at the edge of the trees. Sarah raised her hand in acknowledgement, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of the choice he had made in this meadow, a better choice than he had made on the trail months before. Then they were gone, vanishing into the forest with the same suddenness with which they had appeared. The meadow returned to its peaceful state, wildflowers nodding in the breeze, birds resuming their songs, as if the human drama had been merely a momentary interruption in the land's ancient rhythms. Sarah and Nakohe remained motionless for several minutes, alert for any sign of deception or return. When it became clear that the prospectors had truly departed, the tension gradually eased from their postures. "You think he will keep word?" Nakohe asked, finally sheathing his knife. "I think he will try," Sarah replied. "Whether the others allow him to is another question." They retreated to the forest edge, still watchful, making their way circuitously back toward the cave rather than directly to the cabin. Caution suggested waiting to ensure the prospectors had truly abandoned their search before returning to their home. At the cave, they settled in the entrance, positioned to observe the surrounding forest while remaining hidden. Elizabeth, released from her carrier, stretched happily on the soft furs, seemingly unaffected by the morning's tension. He could have forced confrontation, Nakohe observed. Had numbers, weapons. Sarah nodded, watching her daughter's contented movements. He could have. I think he wanted to, at first. She considered what had changed William's mind. But actually seeing Elizabeth as a person, not just an idea of his child, I think it made her real to him in a way she hadn't been before. Seeing truth often changes heart, Nakohe agreed, if mind allows it. They sat in comfortable silence for some time, the peaceful aftermath of tension allowing space for reflection. The confrontation that had loomed over them for weeks had come and gone, resolving not with violence, but with unexpected understanding. "We should not return to the cabin immediately," Nakohe said eventually. "Watch for 2 days. Make sure they truly are gone." Sarah agreed with his caution. "And after that? Do we stay? The valley isn't as hidden as it was. Others might find it now that William and his group know it exists." Nakohe considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than worried. "Many valleys in mountains, many places to make home." He looked at her directly. "Question is what you want now." "After. Seeing my husband again. After the choice is made clear." The question touched the core of what had transpired in the meadow. Not just William's choice to leave them in peace, but Sarah's explicit choice of the life she had built with Nakohe over a return to her former existence. "I meant what I said to William," she replied, meeting Nakohe's gaze steadily. "This is our family now, you, me, Elizabeth. The life we've built together is worth more to me than anything civilization offers." Something subtle softened in Nakohe's expression. Not quite a smile, but a warming that reached his eyes. "Apache way says family is not just blood, is those who stand together in storm, who share food in hunger, who place others before self." "Then we are family in every way that matters," Sarah affirmed. Elizabeth chose that moment to roll onto her stomach and push up on her arms, achieving the proto-crawling position she had been practicing for weeks. Her small face contorted with concentration as she rocked forward, making incremental progress across the fur. Both adults watched in quiet delight as she achieved this small milestone, a metaphor for their own journey, moving forward together, one difficult step at a time. When Elizabeth finally exhausted herself and settled with a yawn, Nakohe reached out tentatively, his hand finding Sarah's between them. The simple contact, fingers interlacing, palms meeting, required no words to express its meaning, a choice affirmed, a path chosen together. The following days confirmed what William had promised. The prospectors did not return to search the valley. From vantage points above their camp, Nakohe observed them focusing their attention elsewhere, apparently convinced that the encounter in the meadow had been the end of the matter. When they finally returned to the cabin, they found it largely as they had left it, though showing signs of the prospectors' search. Items moved, stores examined, the hidden root cellar discovered and left open. Nothing significant had been taken, but the violation of their sanctuary was evident in 100 small disturbances. "We'll restore it," Sarah said, surveying the disorder with practical eyes rather than despair. "Make it ours again." Together they cleaned and reorganized, erasing the intruder's presence, reclaiming their home through shared effort. Elizabeth watched from her willow enclosure, babbling occasionally as if offering encouragement. That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a meal of fresh trout and spring greens, Sarah felt a profound sense of contentment despite the uncertainties that still lay ahead. The confrontation with William had forced a final reckoning with her past, allowing her to embrace her present with newfound clarity. "I've been thinking," she said, setting aside her wooden plate, "about what comes next for us." Nakohe looked up attentive. "What thoughts come? This valley has been good to us, but you're right that it may not remain safe now that others know of it." She gestured toward the southern window. You once mentioned traveling west to rougher country with good hunting. I think we should consider it before the main gold rush arrives. Nakohe nodded slowly. Wise thinking. Many beautiful valleys. Beyond Western Ridge, fewer people, more game. He seemed pleased by her strategic consideration. When snow is fully gone from high passes, could move safely with Elizabeth. We'll need to prepare thoroughly, Sarah continued, her practical nature evident in her planning. Map the route, establish caches along the way, ensure we have everything essential for Elizabeth's comfort. The conversation continued into the evening, their planning not rushed but methodical, a shared vision taking shape between them. This was not the desperate flight of refugees, but the deliberate choice of a family seeking the best path forward together. Later, as moonlight filtered through the cabin window and Elizabeth slept peacefully in her cradleboard, Sarah and Nakohe stood together at the door, looking out at the valley that had sheltered them through winter and spring. "No regrets?" Nakohe asked quietly, his arm encircling her shoulders with gentle strength. Sarah leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest, where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "This path chose me when I was abandoned on the trail, but continuing it is my choice entirely." In the distance, an owl called, 3 long notes echoing across the valley. Another answered from closer at hand, the simple communication traveling through the darkness, a reminder that they were part of something larger than themselves, connected to this land and to each other by bonds both chosen and discovered. Sarah Mitchell, once abandoned by gold seekers and saved by a silent Apache tracker, now stood at the threshold of a future she could never have imagined when leaving Springfield all those months ago. Not a future of prosperity built on gold, dust and commerce, but of richness measured in resilience, in partnership, in a family forged through adversity and sustained by love. The gold rush would come and go. Boomtowns would rise and fall. Men would continue to chase elusive fortunes across the continent. But here, in this hidden valley, and in the new home they would create beyond the Western Ridge, something more precious had been discovered. A life of authenticity, connection, and profound belonging. As spring blossoms opened across the awakening landscape, and their daughter grew stronger each day, Sarah and Nakohe faced the future not with fear, but with quiet confidence. 2 travelers who had found in each other, not just survival, but the rarest of human treasures. A shared path walked in harmony, step by deliberate step, into whatever lay beyond the next mountain pass. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.